sights are smelt and sounds are seen. Motion becomes a web of frozen moments. And often the world is strewn with bizarre distortions of reality. But hallucinations and pretty colors are only part of the story. LSD also affects the subconscious mind. In the early 1950s, psychiatrists began to investigate this aspect of the drug. All over the world, scientific papers appeared reporting the use of LSD in the treatment of psychiatric patients. The leading center was Powys Hospital in England. Here, in a purpose-built facility known as the LSD block, hundreds of mentally ill people were treated with LSD. The consultant psychiatrist who pioneered this work was Ronald Sanderson. For a decade, he ran the Powys unit. Today, the LSD block has been converted into offices. Dr. Sanderson returns there to recall the past.
This is where we worked 30 years ago?
Yes, I didn't quite remember it as being this sort of shape. I remember something a different entrance from the corridor.
Ah, yes.
With him is Dr. John Whitelaw, a colleague from the LSD days.
This, remember, was the trolley area where the nursing staff used to set up the LSD ampoules. They draw the LSD out of the syringe, and you know, you had little medicine glasses that poured it into, and distilled water was added to it. They just used to stand where you are and mix the stuff. Most people noticed that the first effects came on after about 20 minutes, and somewhere in the first hour they would retire to their own particular room which had been allocated to them. And looked at from the outside, you might think there was nothing going on, because LSD doesn't have a marked effect on behaviour. What it affects is in internal mental processes. We used to have a little bed in the... single bed.
The point of giving patients LSD was to release suppressed memories and mental conflicts that psychoanalysts believe are the root cause of mental illness. LSD was perhaps a key to unlock the unconscious mind.
There's a curious kind of artifact in the early stages of LSD that people often have a great tendency to laugh, and that seems to be a sort of side effect. And I experienced it myself when I took LSD, and I wasn't quite sure, you know, it wasn't funny, I wasn't laughing at anything, but I just had this thing. So that sort of sets the scene for experiencing greater emotional intensity. But with our patients, there was very often a great deal of fear, a great deal of crying, sobbing, and then of course one would want to move in and try and get the patient to relate that to what they're actually experiencing in themselves.
Given the reputation LSD has today, it's natural to wonder whether any patients were harmed by the drug.
We don't believe that anybody had a long-term psychosis. I know that cases have been reported from other parts of the world, but we examined our consciences pretty carefully in that respect, and I don't believe anybody was permanently damaged.
Extraordinary as it now seems, thousands of people were given LSD in psychiatric hospitals during the 50s. According to several independent studies, there were surprisingly few bad side effects. And a second group began to experiment with hallucinogenic drugs around this time. They were artists and intellectuals, and their inspiration came from the British writer Aldous Huxley. Huxley was fascinated by mystical experience and believed that a drug called mescaline might be a means to achieve it. Mescaline is found in a cactus called peyote, used by the Huichol Indians of Mexico. They regard peyote as sacred, and they've consumed it in religious ceremonies for centuries. Subjectively, the effects of mescaline are identical to those of LSD. The drug precipitates a charged and overwhelming journey of the soul. In 1953, Aldous Huxley sent an invitation to a British psychiatrist who had suggested a link between the effects of mescaline and the symptoms of schizophrenia.
He'd asked me down there for many reasons, but one of them was that he hoped that I'd give him mescaline. He'd been cleared by his doctor. This seemed to be one way out on my part. I was disconcerted that he'd bought a grey autograph, and so I had no way out, really. And so as on the second last day of my visit, I stood stirring in the mescaline, which has a strange, oily swirl. And I wondered if I would be remembered as a man who'd gone to California and driven Aldous Huxley mad. I thought it would be really a rather invidious reputation.
Thus it came about one bright May morning. I swallowed 4/10 of a gram of mescaline dissolved in half a glass of water, and sat down to wait for the results. After a while, I became aware of a slow dance of golden lights. I was looking intently at a small vase of flowers. My eyes travelled from the rose to the carnation, and to the smooth scrolls of sentient amethyst, which was the iris. I was seeing what Adam had seen on the morning of his creation, the miracle, moment by moment, of naked existence. I looked down by chance. I went on passionately staring by choice at my own crossed legs. Those folds in the trousers. What a labyrinth of endlessly significant complexity. This is how one ought to see, how things really are. Now someone produced a phonograph and put a recording on the turntable. The voices were a kind of bridge back to the human world. Uneven phrases of the madrigals pursued their course, never sticking to the same key for 2 bars together. And suddenly, I had an inkling of what it must be like to be mad. I found myself on the brink of panic, disintegrating under pressure of a reality greater than a mind accustomed to the cozy world of symbols could possibly bear. None too soon, I began to return to that reassuring but profoundly unsatisfactory state known as being in one's right mind. The man who comes back through the door in the wall will never be quite the same as the man who went out.
The world he saw that May morning in 1953 profoundly impressed Huxley. A name was required for a substance that could provoke such revelatory experience.
Aldous suggested phanerothym, a phaneroin to reveal and thumos the soul. And he then wrote this little rhyme, to make this mundane world sublime, take 1/2 gram of phanerothym. And I thought this was a wonderful word, but rather too difficult for most people. It's a Huxley word, so I wrote back to him, having looked up in the dictionary the fact that the word psyche, of course, was available, and so was deluon to reveal, and about 6 others. But I fixed on psychedelic and wrote back to fall in hell or so angelic, you'll need a pinch of psychedelic.
In your book about mescaline recently, you talked of a valuable state of heightened perception, being induced by drugs, by proper drugs. Do you think imaginative writers would benefit by that?
Well, I think the people who would benefit most of all are professors. And this, I think it would be extremely good for almost any